back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Danny Cannell. That's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live on CBS Sports Network. Fired up V here with you on a Tuesday. Over the course of the next hour, we are going to be setting the table for the week ahead in the Big Ten. We are going to be taking you inside that massive matchup between USC and Michigan in the Big House, the Big Ten on CBS game this week. Also, a look at the Friday night affair of ranked on ranked between Nebraska and Illinois. It's some big game breakdown style, just like you know, but gentlemen, I want to begin with some surprises, some teams that maybe were not necessarily high on our radar when we were gathered together at the Big Ten Media Days. Certainly storylines with all these, but we've got 4 teams here that were all unranked to start the year, that are all, as we head here into week 4, 3-0 to start the season. Illinois, Indiana, Michigan State, and Nebraska. So let's roll through them, and let's begin with Illinois. So we're going to play a little game. It's going to be a little buy, little sell, keeping this open-ended so you can determine the parameters as you want. For the Illinois Fighting Illini, Tom, you know you've got to go first. Are you buying or selling this 3-0 start from Illinois?
My answer might surprise a lot of our longtime listeners and Cover 3 fans here, but I'm selling a little bit. As long as whether you mean buy or sell as if this team can continue at the trajectory it's at, I have to sell because I think this team is better than we thought coming into the year. They had a preseason win total of only 5.5. They're already more than halfway there. I think the win over Kansas a couple weeks ago on Friday night was a big win for them, but at the same time, Kansas followed that up the next week by losing at home to UNLV. So maybe that win wasn't as impressive as we thought. But more than anything, if you've watched this Illini team through the first 3 weeks defensively, they're much better than they were last year. But they have been very reliant on forcing turnovers, and the pass rush that was a problem last season continues to be a problem this year. They are not getting a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks, and I think it's hard to rely on forcing interceptions and fumbles when you're not pressuring the QB, so I have some concerns whether that will withstand as the season goes along. Furthermore, the run game, you think of Brett Bielema team, you think of a team that's going to be able to pound you on the ground. Illinois has struggled to run the ball between the tackles, and I don't know if they will be able to fix that. But more important than anything, I think the biggest problem Illinois faces is its schedule. They've started off the season with Eastern Illinois, Kansas, and Central Michigan. 4 of the next 5 games, including this Friday night, are Nebraska, Penn State, Michigan, and Oregon. And of those 4, only Michigan is coming to Champaign. The other 3 are on the road. So I think you have to be very happy with this 3-0 start if you're an Illini fan, because you needed a 3-0 start with what's coming your way.
So we're buying and selling, right? I mean, this sounds like Day Trader Danny right up my alley, which is why I got my book right here. I got my trading log. I'm ready to write down my trades here. I am on the same boat as Tom, in large part agreement with almost everything you said. Most importantly, the schedule is about to get real. And so where do you find out about this team? Like, where do they stand in the hierarchy of the Big Ten? And I think it's probably better than we thought. Like, it's somewhere in the middle, but I think it's higher towards the upper end of the middle than maybe the bottom end, which is where we might have had them pegged going in. Luke Altmaier's been a pleasant surprise. He's taking care of the football. He's not turning it over, which is a great thing. But I do wonder if that ground game, because I do think that's what's most important for all these schools we're going to discuss, like physicality. How do you stack up with the offensive and defensive lines of those teams that are at the top tier that these teams are trying to get into? And especially on the defensive line, I just wonder how they're going to stand up against more of the physical teams they place. You mentioned the secondary, 6 interceptions. That's 3rd in the country. Only 2 schools have more than they do. That has been probably the one bright side, and it's been awesome to see. But I think when they start facing some of these tougher, more talented teams, I don't think teams are going to have to rely on the pass, be playing from behind, throwing it up for grabs a little bit more. That's when the true heart of this defense could get tested. And I wonder how they fare against the likes of Michigan, Oregon, some of the more Penn State, the more physical teams they're going to have to play against.
Yeah, Brett Bielema is just going to clip this because we're a triple sell right here. So look, we're giving you all the motivation, all the locker room material that you need, Coach. I think that the thing that stands out to me, and it goes along with a lot of what you guys are saying, are the margins, right? If you're going to continue on this trajectory and be able to continue to stack wins, especially as the schedule is getting tougher, then you need to have shown us in your 3-0 start, and there's some other teams we're going to discuss that certainly have, that you are tiers, that you are levels better than the competition, that you are leaving no doubt, so that if you get a couple bad bounces, if you get a couple bad breaks, it's not going to totally pull the pin out of everything that you've got built. And I do think that Illinois is operating with much tighter margins. They've been able to come up on the winning side thanks to some of those winning plays that they have along the way. But when you've got those small margins over the course of a 12-game season, I think that we're going to see water find its level, so to speak. Now, Illinois, like snap call here, still a bowl team? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's the thing.
They're already halfway there.
Right. Yeah. You got 3 wins. Just stuff them in the bag. Doesn't matter how they look. Like, you've got 3 wins here. Illinois, a team that was kind of on that bowl cut line in terms of preseason expectations. Great start, but I do think that we'll start to see things balance out just a little bit. Speaking of margins, Danny, the margins with which the Indiana Hoosiers are thumping their opponents is quite impressive. Now, like, we can do a second call on where UCLA is at, and you go back and you look at the first 2 games for Indiana. The competition has to be taken into consideration, but are you buying or selling what Indiana has done so far with their new head coach, Curt Cignetti?
I don't see how you don't buy. I'm buying some Indiana stock, and it feels reminiscent of when Indiana was a darling under Tom Allen, like early in his tenure, and they had one of the more impressive starts and finishes to the Indiana football program. I think the MVP of this team, though, is whoever made this schedule, because it is incredibly favorable. A couple blowout wins, and then the timing wise, I mean, you can't UCLA. That looks like a few years ago. You're like, man, that looks like a rough road trip. They go out there and absolutely dominate this one. Then they come back with some winnable games. They could be 6-0, and that was a situation I don't think any of us would have even imagined when we were sitting down there at Indianapolis talking about what Indiana could be this season. Like, hey, this is a foundational year. You'll have some bumps along the way, but over the long haul, we feel good about him. I feel good about him right away, which is a great thing to have with Curt Cignetti as the new hire. He came in talking big game, calling out Michigan, calling out Ohio State, the Blue Bloods. Now he's calling out officials. I mean, you truly haven't arrived until you're calling out officials after wins and saying, man, they could do better. But I think you have to feel good about him. So I am buying this program, especially when you compare it to expectations where they're going to far exceed what I think anyone thought they could be this year.
Yeah, I'm buying as much Indiana as I can get right now, too. This isn't a fluke. This isn't a mirage. This is a very good football team. Not to the level where I think they're going to compete for a Big Ten title, but to the level where when you're looking at that tier below the conference title contenders, I think the Hoosiers are already there, and they're going to remain there for the rest of the season, because you see Curt Cignetti come in. A lot of times a new coach comes in, brings a lot of transfers in, and there's a bit of a time needed for the team to gel and kind of figure each other out. That hasn't been the case here, because a lot of the transfers Cignetti brought in, he had with him at James Madison, so there's already the familiarity there. You bring in Curtis Rourke, the quarterback from Ohio, who has plenty of experience. There's nothing he hasn't seen, and the offense he's playing in is very similar to the offense he was running with the Ohio Bobcats, so there hasn't been that kind of transition for him. And what we've seen is this team has come out on fire to start the season. No, the schedule has not been impressive, but they have been absolutely dominant. They have not trailed for a snap this season. They have had the lead for 92% of the snaps that they have played on both sides of the ball, and they've had a 2-score lead for 83% of the snaps that they have played. They are blowing the doors off of teams early, and they are keeping their foot on the gas pedal, showing no mercy. Last week, they put up over 40 points on the road in their first road game in against a conference opponent in UCLA. And Danny, as you mentioned, that schedule, I'll be shocked if they don't start 6-0. I think that by the time they get to that Nebraska game in week 8, we're going to be looking at a possible matchup of top 15, top 10-ish kind of teams in the rankings based on where their records might be. So I think this Hoosiers team is good. I think they're going to win at least 8 games. They might win 9.
Yeah, this is not a criticism of a leadership style, but I saw an Indiana fan point out on social media over the weekend that Tom Allen is very much like, hey, y'all have a good time. Everybody love each other. And Kurt Signetti is like, if you do false start one more time, I'm throwing you into a wood chipper. Okay, let's go. I mean, there's just a different standard, a different way that Coach Sig is handling his business. All right, what about those Michigan State Spartans? Danny, I'll go to you here first because Jonathan Smith can coach some ball. We know that. And he brings over Aiden Childs, who, as we've discussed on the Cover 3 podcast, the ceiling and the floor are a skyscraper apart from each other thanks to the variance in Aiden Childs' performance right now. So are you buying or selling this 3-0 start for the Spartans?
I'm buying them, man. I think some people might say, well, why'd you sell Illinois and why are you buying Michigan State? Because their schedule's about to get realer as well, and they might be staring at some L's. But I do think it does have to do with what I think Aiden Giles could be. I mean, he's still an incredibly young quarterback who is very raw, and I'd love to see where he falls in the whoopsie-daisy meter because against Maryland, there was some whoopsie-daisy throws, but there was also a throw to tie up the game that was one of those wow throws where you're like, oh my goodness, they have a chance. I think this is the best coach they've been in at least 5 or 6 years, probably since the D'Antonio era was there. I think there's a team that's playing much more disciplined. The schedule is brutal, though. So I think in like the short term, this might feel a little bit painful, but I would add to the long-term stock portfolio of getting more Sparty because I think Jonathan Smith has this program headed in the right direction.
I'm going to sell. I agree with you. They are much better coached now under Jonathan Smith and the staff than they had been the last few years. But as talented as Aiden Childs is, he's an absolute roller coaster. One play, he looks spectacular. The next play, you're wondering if he realizes what sport he's playing. So when I look at Michigan State, even after this 3-0 start, they've turned the ball over far too often. And while this defense is improved, I still don't think it's elite. And there are going to be much better offenses coming to town that they're going to have to deal with. It's great to get off to this 3-0 start, but to me, it reminds me of the same situation as Illinois. It's probably going to get a lot more difficult. You should get to a bowl game, but outside of maybe 6-6 and 7-5, I don't know what your expectations should be.
Yeah, I don't know if beating Maryland's going to do it for me, right? I need just a little bit more to be able to go all the way. It's going to be a sell for me, at least in the 2024 season, but I do agree long-term we should be good. All right, one more here. We are going to discuss Nebraska in a bit more detail for our big game breakdown for that Friday night showdown with Illinois. But Tom, are you buying or selling this 3-0 start and the hype train around the Nebraska Cornhuskers?
I'm selling, but only because I think the hype is a little too hot right now. I think Nebraska fans are very excited over how this team has started, and I think they should be because it's been a very long time for them since they've been able to feel this good. But some of the underlying metrics that I care about when it comes to evaluating teams for these Cornhuskers are not impressive. They're kind of middle of the road in the Big Ten right now in a lot of these aspects. And Dylan Raiola, as good as he's looked, hasn't seen a good defense yet. He is still a true freshman. They haven't put a whole lot on his plate. I think we're going to see a little bit of a downturn, not where they're going to fall apart, but again, kind of like Michigan State and Illinois, I still think this is closer to like a 7-5 than a 9-3 team.
So, when I enter trades in my trade book, green is buy. I am buying Nebraska, and I am buying the preseason prediction that I gave you right here on Cover 3 podcast. They'll be 7-0 when they go to the Horseshoe on October 26th. They play against a couple of those teams that we talked about, Illinois and Indiana. I like their chances against both of them, but I am a little bit nervous because they haven't really been battle tested and answered the one question that hasn't been answered. How do they do in one-possession games? They haven't had one yet. They're probably about to face one, maybe even this Friday night against Illinois, but I think they're ready for that challenge, but it does have me a little bit cautious, but I'm still buying.
Oh, I'm buying. You can feed me all the hype I can get. When you've got Matt Rule out here that everybody needs to step their level up to Dylan Raiola, you've got somebody special. And I don't care if Matt Rule's feeding me more fire for the hype train. I'll take it all. Give me a buy on Nebraska's 3-0 start. Well, coming up on the other side, we go big game breakdown style, taking a look at that showdown on CBS, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's USC and it's Michigan in the big house. We'll break it down next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Love to get you set for the weekend ahead with a little something we like to call Big Game Breakdown, and it don't get much bigger than when we get USC and Michigan clashing in the big house. For programs that have, such clout within this sport, some of the most recognizable helmets that you've got in the entire country, they've only played 11 times in the history of their respective programs. 8 of those times have been in the Rose Bowl, so this is the first regular season meeting for USC and Michigan since 1958. But forget the history books. That's what they say about USC and Michigan's rivalry, right? Just throw out the record books. Let's talk about the matchup, Danny. When you're looking here at Sharon Moore naming Alex Orji as the starting quarterback after having to bench Davis Warren in that game against Arkansas State, what are you expecting from Michigan, and what does Michigan need to do to be able to find success when they've got the ball?
Well, I tell you what, I think it was a pretty easy decision for Sharon Moore. I mean, Davis Warren was handed the keys to this offense and couldn't drive the car and keep it between the lanes. I mean, 2 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. That'll get you benched almost any place out there. And he just struggled with ball security. I mean, that's the one thing a quarterback has to remember is you have to protect the football. And he was just too careless with it. But I think the benefit of this, there will be no question about the identity of this Michigan team, because I felt like this was a team that was searching for one. When Davis Warren was in there, we talked a lot about this. There were 2 different offenses. Well, we're going to be pro style, and we're going to drop back pass, and we're going to do play action pass. When Alex Orji would come in, a little bit more spread option style, and they would run him more. It was a little bit more situational. Now, unequivocally, this Michigan team wants to run the football. They want to cram it down your throat, and they'll sacrifice whatever they need to in the pass game. But what I'm curious to see is if they can establish the run, does that open up some lanes for the play action pass to move the ball downfield? And I don't think Alex Orji has to be somebody that's just picking you apart from the pocket. He just has to make sure he doesn't turn it over, make a few plays here or there, and then you can try to extend drives, keep the ball away, work that time of possession, and keep it away from USC's defense. So I think that's probably one benefit, is that they know exactly what they're going to do going into this game, and there's no doubt about what they want to be now.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting aspects about this being Alex Orji's first start is we have seen plenty of Alex Orji over the last few years. He's come in as kind of a change of pace to J.J. McCarthy last year, wasn't very effective doing it. We've seen Michigan use him at times this year as a change of pace with Davis Warren, and then last week he comes in to replace Davis Warren. And nothing we've seen has been very promising, but we haven't really seen Alex Orji given a chance to play an entire game yet to see if he can get into the flow of a football game, knowing that the offense is designed for him, and he doesn't have to worry about, okay, am I coming out after this snap? When am I coming back in? It's just, all right, you're out there, kid. Let's do it. Let's see what you got. So perhaps having the whole game plan to himself and designed for him will lead to better results, which Michigan needs, because offensively they have been a mess. But there's another side of this game that I do have concerns about. It's Michigan's defense. If you look at what the Wolverines have done this year, they blitz a lot. They did not blitz nearly as much against Texas because history has suggested Quinn Ewers, go ahead, blitz him. He doesn't care. He'll just pick you apart. Steve Sarkisian teams often do that. So Michigan was far more conservative in that aspect against the Longhorns than they were in their games against Fresno and last week against Arkansas State. I expect we will see them blitz heavy again this week against Miller Moss, who has good numbers while pressured, but he hasn't really faced a lot of blitzes. The problem is, as much as Michigan is blitzed, it hasn't been very effective. They come into this game 102nd nationally in pressure rate on quarterbacks and 104th in pressure to blitz ratio. So even when they're bringing guys, they're not getting to the other quarterback. Granted, some of that has to do with Quinn Ewers being Quinn Ewers and getting out of the pocket and making stuff happen. But that'll be interesting to see, because if you look at this USC offense, this is Miller Moss's 4th start. We've been very impressed by what we have seen from him in his first 3, going back to the bowl game against Louisville. But you can also make the argument that he hasn't played a good defense yet. That Louisville defense in the bowl game was missing a few key players. There were a lot of breakdowns in that secondary, and to Miller Moss's credit, he took advantage of all of them. But against LSU, nobody looks at the Tigers as a team with a great defense. Utah State, nobody's going to look at Utah State as a great defense. This Michigan team has NFL players on it at every single level. how will Miller Moss perform against this defense, which is very good, when he's in the big house surrounded by 100,000 people who are going to be making a lot of noise? I would think that if you're USC, you're going to want to rely more on your ground game than you have through the first 2 games of the season. But when you have handed the ball off, USC hasn't been able to run the ball very effectively. So if they can't run the ball in the big house and they have to force, go through the pass and they allow Michigan to be one-dimensional and start bringing all that extra heat, what's it going to look like? So I think that when you look at these two teams right now, USC is clearly the one you feel better about. But I'm not so sure we should be at the point where we're looking at USC as a team that, oh yeah, to be favored by about a touchdown going on the road to face Michigan. So I think there's to be a lot of questions answered about both teams on Saturday.
Well, it is bananas. We are dealing with, I think, the first time in 30 plus seasons, Michigan has been a home underdog of 5+ points in multiple games. I mean, that's like going back to what like Ace Rothstein in the movie Casino when he's like drawing on the chalkboard. Like do we have to go all the way back to Ace to find times where Michigan's had those kinds of scenarios? I'm curious about a Sharon Moore side of this and a pick, obviously, or a lean before we get out of here. But I guess, Tom, I'll throw this to you first. We are dealing with a point in the season where we've got a lot of small sample size, and USC was off last week. They followed up the win against LSU with a 48-0 shutout of Utah State. First shutout win for USC since 2011. But do you buy into USC's defensive improvement? Because I see, only 20+ points allowed across 2 games. You've got less missed tackles. It seems like it's all good, but again, it's really one game against competition anywhere close to what you're going to face with Michigan. Do you think that Trojans defense is at a place where that can be maybe where USC ends up hanging its hat on to try to get a win on Saturday?
I've no doubt in my mind that USC's defense is better than it was the last few years. I think you only need the game against LSU to realize that, because USC's defense was awful the last few years. And against LSU, a very good offense, they made stops. They made tackles. They gave up some big plays, yes, but everybody's going to give up big plays to that LSU defense. Overall, they looked better coached, and they looked more prepared for what they were going up against. And I don't take anything from that Utah State game too seriously, but as far as the question, I don't know if I'd consider this defense to be elite or anything by any stretch, and I think we'll have a much better idea of that after this game. But at the same time, if Michigan's offense continues to look as awful as it has through the first few weeks of the season, I don't know how much credit we would really give to USC for it, because if they've struggled to move the ball against Fresno State and they struggled to move the ball against Arkansas State, if they struggle to move the ball against USC, does that really tell us anything about USC?
Yeah, and even they definitely, USC looked better against LSU. Clearly, the tackling was better, just open field tackling. They were coached up better. They weren't just getting walked all over like they did last year. But they're not going to face an attack like this. And I think this is one where Lincoln Riley has to challenge his defense and say, you know what? We know exactly what we're going to get. And people have challenged your manhood every step of the way since I've been here. There is no question what you're going to face, and you guys have to live up to the challenge. What I don't know is, because it is so unique, are they ready for that challenge? Because LSU had Garrett Nussmeier. They were throwing the ball throughout the air. And when they did run it a little bit when Emory Jones, before he got hurt, they were running it and gashing him a little bit. This will unequivocally be the biggest physical test of the year. Side note, I kind of wish USC didn't have a bye week. I would have liked to see them carry that momentum into this game. It's so early in the season. They had so much mojo going. They got to click this thing back on and get up to speed, and it's coming in a hurry in that atmosphere.
Danny, I'm 100% right with you right there, because you're facing a Michigan team that's kind of the dog backed into the corner, and the only way out is to try to out-muscle and out-physical a USC team. I mean, these are two teams that they don't clash a lot, but they are certainly going to fall back to their most basic principles, and that's what Michigan is hoping. Okay, so what are you expecting? Danny, early lean on this game. It can be the side, the spread, the style, the nature. What do you think ends up happening?
I think it's going to be a fist fight in a phone booth. I think Michigan's going to try to slow the pace down. I think it's lower scoring. I do think this might be a game where Michigan's defense has way more success than they did against Texas.
We were doing our show live on Monday when the Alex Orji news broke, and the very first thing I did was open my phone go to my app and bet the under, because I look at this game. I think Michigan's offense is going to be running the ball a lot more with Orji even than it already does. And I had mentioned earlier, I have questions about this USC offense going on the road for Miller Moss's first real true road start in an environment like this. So I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I also think it's going to be a close game. It'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, this is a either you're holding your nose and you're just taking Michigan and hope that they drag USC into the mud, but I have a hard time trusting these Wolverines. I think USC gets the win, but my best bet's probably going to be, as we mentioned, the under 46.5. Coming up on the other side, we talked about some of those surprise teams that were not ranked in the preseason but are now off to a 3-0 start. Well, 2 of them are in the top 25. We got a little AP poll elimination game on Friday night. So let's go inside the matchup. Nebraska and Illinois, where the matchup will be decided. We'll do it big game breakdown style. All that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Big Ten action on Friday night will feature a pair of ranked teams as Illinois goes to face Nebraska. Both teams off to a 3-0 start. Both teams starting their Big Ten conference play with this primetime showdown. And we will have time to talk about Dylan Raiola, the superstar freshman quarterback. But I'd like to throw a little curveball, Tom, if that's okay with you, because I would like to ask you about Luke Altmaier, because here's something that just stands out. We had Luke Altmaier throw 10 interceptions last year. It was second in the Big Ten in terms of the kind of category you don't want to be second in, interceptions. So far this year, 6 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. You mentioned earlier in the show that it's been a little bit of a surprise, Illinois not necessarily being able to get up there and run the ball at will like you might have thought coming into the year. Where is your confidence in Luke Altmaier, and where is your confidence in him being able to lead an offense that can go into hostile territory in Lincoln and be able to put Illinois in a position to win the game?
That's a good question. From what I have seen so far this season, I think the biggest difference in Luke Altmaier is, he's more comfortable in the offense going into his second season as a starter, and more familiarity is never going to hurt any quarterback in any situation. But I also think he's been far more decisive with the football. I think last year at times you saw him kind of standing in the pocket a little too long, waiting for guys to get open and waiting for things to be perfect, and then getting sacked because of it. But this year, he's making the decision. He's making the first read. If it's not there, he's moving to the second guy. He's getting the ball out, or he is leaving the pocket himself. But I also think another large factor is last year, Illinois' offensive line was not very good in pass protection. And I think this year, it's kind of the opposite. I feel like they got 2 tackles in J.C. Davis and Melvin Priestley, both out of the transfer portal. J.C. Davis came from New Mexico. Priestley came from Grambling. And they've been very good for keeping a pocket and pass protecting. It's when the run game where I feel like the interior of that line has kind of struggled a bit. So he's been able to drop back. He's gotten time. Receivers Pat Bryant, Sakari Franklin, another transfer who came in from Ole Miss, was familiar with current Illinois offensive coordinator Barry Lunny from their time together at UTSA. They've been very important for him. Illinois is taking a lot of shots down the field. And the one thing about Altmaier is I do feel like when it comes to the vertical passing game, he has very good touch and accuracy, and that has been on display a lot for the Illini so far this season. So I do think things are going very well for him. But at the same time, I don't know if he's faced a defense that's as good as the Nebraska defense he will be seeing this week. It'll be on the road in a tough environment. I do expect that, if that interior offensive line continues to struggle, Nebraska's got a couple of good guys on the inside of their defensive line, starting with Nash Hutmacher, the polar bear, who could be very disruptive, who could cause some problems for them. So to me, that's going to be an interesting aspect to watch from the Illini side of things on offense.
I used to sit in the studio in New York when we were doing a lot of UTSA games, and I loved Sakari Franklin and what he brought to the table. And I thought he was going to work at Ole Miss. For whatever reason, it didn't. But I think it's got to be a great sign for the Illini that you've got that version that you saw that really dominated when he was UTSA. And it's kind of amazing. He's helped the whole receiving core. They're kind of lifted up level of play. You can't focus on just one guy and roll coverage. So it's opened up things for Pat Bryant somewhat as well. The offensive line, I'll be curious because I do think this is a game where you want to get Fegan going more. Caden Fegan, the 6'3", 250-pound Mack truck. Like, this is one where it's hard. Like, it's one thing to run the ball and to throw it and have that success through the air, and it puts Altmaier in really good situations and be able to protect the football. But I do think this is one where you'd want to establish the run game. And it's on the road. There's no better way to silence a crowd than to start sustaining drives, to kind of, work your way and to establish some sort of dominance on the ground. So that's a matchup for me that I'll be watching, because I don't think they're going to be able to go in there and just start throwing it all over the yard. They got to bring more balance to the table. And I'm sure that'll be part of Brett Bielema's game plan for this Illinois offense when they go into Lincoln.
Yeah, Nebraska's defense, even when they were having their struggles last season, has been so structurally sound. They don't have a lot of breakdowns. They do a great job of keeping the action in front of them, of swarming to the ball. I mean, it was a lot of the game plan against Shedeur Sanders in Colorado, where it's like, okay, I'll tell you what you're not going to do is you're not beating us over the top. We're going to make sure that we step up and we rally to the ball and we make you work for every little bit. Definitely important for them to have some balance. Okay, now let's go to superstar time. Let's go to our superstar quarterback, Danny. Have you seen enough to believe that Dylan Raiola is, in fact, that dude?
Oh, baby Patrick Mahomes, who definitely didn't do all this on purpose. Definitely doesn't wear 15, doesn't wear his hairstyle that way. Clearly, he doesn't do that on purpose. He's lived up to the hype. I mean, he's exceeded, I think, most people's expectations of what he could be, and those were incredibly lofty expectations. I think the thing that's impressed me most is sort of the poise, the composure, the confidence with which he's playing with. But I will say this, he has not faced an adverse situation yet. And whenever I look at quarterbacks, I like to evaluate them after they've thrown a pick six, after they've had a game where they threw 2 picks that potentially lost them a game or flat out did lose them a game. He hasn't had that. They've played from out in front every game, including a very dominant first half against Colorado, where they're not real high-stress situations. We talked earlier about Nebraska. The one thing that they haven't answered yet is those one-possession games. What happens if it's the second half and they're coming out and they're trailing by 3 points, or it's the fourth quarter and it's a tie game? How does he respond in that situation? Look, clearly he's looked the part so far. I would be shocked if he doesn't look comfortable, but sometimes you try to do a little bit too much, and this is the type of game where every possession is amplified, so some of those rookie mistakes could end up costing you a game.
I'm not going to judge Dylan Raiola too harshly for the Patrick Mahomes obsession, because when I was his age, you might have confused me with a member of the band Korn. So when you're 18, you've got idols and you do what you want to do. What does bother me about Raiola's obsession with Patrick Mahomes is he doesn't have to make every single throw he makes look like Patrick Mahomes doing something cool. Like, I wish he would step into more throws and fire some rockets. He looks a little too nonchalant at times, and it does bother me. And as you mentioned, Danny, going up against a better defense, perhaps that could kind of come to haunt him in this game. But the most interesting thing to me about Raiola is, all of that aside, for a kid with as little experience as he has done such an excellent job of getting the ball out quickly and on time. You know, a couple weeks ago, Shedeur said, how many times was Raiola touched, throwing his offensive line under the bus? He wasn't touched because he got rid of the ball, which is what a good quarterback is supposed to do. And the other side of that, though, Nebraska hasn't asked him to do a whole lot. If you look at Raiola's pass chart so far this season, 34 of his 80 pass attempts have been at the line of scrimmage or behind it. He's also using the middle of the field nearly exclusively. If you add in throws between the hash marks, 47 of his 80 passes have either been behind the line of scrimmage or between the hashes. Are they going to open up the entire field for him, or is that the only place where they're comfortable with? Because I can guarantee you Illinois understands that, and Illinois is going to do what it has to do to try to confuse him pre-snap and try to take away what he's, been comfortable with. And as we talked about early in the show, Illinois has done a very good job of forcing turnovers. Can they bait Dylan Raiola into turning the ball over? And if they do, and he gets kind of rattled, how will he respond to that? Because we have not seen that situation yet, because he's been so good to start his career that we don't know what it's going to look like when he has to deal with adversity.
A defense with 6 interceptions against a freshman quarterback in a primetime slate. Let's go. All right, let's get some early leans, some early thoughts. Our best bets, of course, always available on Thursday's Lock Show. You can watch it live at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, youtube.com/cover3. This thing was, 8.5 the beginning of the week. We're seeing it race all the way out to 9.5, maybe even 10 in some spots, over under in the mid to lower 40s. Tom, how do you think this one plays out?
If it gets to 10, I'd hammer Illinois because I do think Nebraska is going to win this game. It's just I have a difficult time looking at a team with a true freshman quarterback and thinking that they are going to win by double digits against a team with a defense this good. I think it's going to be close. I do think Nebraska is better overall, and I do think defensively they will be able to limit a lot of what Illinois is going to try to do. It's just I don't have full hope in Nebraska's ability to pull away because we saw in the second half against Colorado. Colorado's defense is not good, and it wasn't like Nebraska just completely took their foot off the gas pedal. They were still trying to move the ball, and they were pretty ineffective doing it. So it'll be interesting to see if they can sustain that for 60 minutes enough to pull away. I think they win, but I think it's close.
The Scott brothers, even though they're not brothers in the secondary for the Fighting Illini, I think it all comes to an end. I like Nebraska. I'm bullish on Nebraska. The one thing, too, the vibes, this place is going to be absolutely bonkers. We already saw it against Colorado. Now I think you multiply that even a little bit more. I think it's going to be a tough challenge in that atmosphere for Illinois.
I got to see it. I'm with Tom. I think this one's going to be a little bit closer. If this spread gets too big, then I see this one. Ball's in number 15's hands, and he's got to go make a play. And for someone who fancies himself after Patrick Mahomes, that's what you should want. Come on, and maybe we can profit. All right, coming up on the other side, we've had some conversations about teams that have gotten off to quick starts, but what about even sort of big picture? What are some of our biggest surprises of the early season? Plus, a little bit later, our player to watch for Week 4 in the Big Ten. All that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. It's crazy. So many of these teams have already played 3 games, and that's a quarter of your regular season. So we got to take stock, take temperature, kind of where we're at here at the quarter pole. And so, simply put, Danny, what is one of your biggest surprises of what we've seen so far in the Big Ten in 2024?
Now, I have to put this into context because I did pick Oregon to win the national championship, and I picked Dylan Gabriel to win the Heisman Trophy. So I am surprised at their slow-ish start. Now, they did play much better against Oregon State, went into Corvallis. You finally got sort of a total performance on both sides of the ball. Not surprised at all at Dylan Gabriel, the efficiency. Now I need to see a little bit more big play capability. I think they're going to be okay, but I thought they would roll through Idaho. I thought they would shut down Ashton Genty and that run game that they had. Instead, those were both way closer than you would have thought. Hopefully, the team that we saw play against Oregon State is a sign of things to come. It should even get better against UCLA and Michigan State before that game against Ohio State. But they need a lot of improvement before I can buy in and look good on my prediction for the Ducks.
My biggest surprise has been how bad Michigan has looked. Like, I was the guy in the offseason saying, listen, I understand that it's not going to be the same as it has been the last 3 years. You lose Jim Harbaugh, most of your coaching staff. You lose so many starters on the offensive side of the ball, including J.J. McCarthy. But the floor will not completely fall out. This is still going to be a pretty good football team. And I'm no longer convinced it's a pretty good football team. I think the offense particularly has been a lot worse than I anticipated. The offensive line, we've spent a bunch of time talking about the quarterbacks. I think the offensive line needs to kind of, pick up the pace and start playing better for this team to play well no matter who's at quarterback. We haven't really seen a ton of that. And I think defensively, for all the stars that they have, they're a little susceptible. We saw Texas pick them apart. There are certain guys in that secondary other teams seem interested in picking on. Will Johnson can't cover every receiver on the field at the same time, although I don't know, maybe he could. Give him a shot. But I just think overall, this Wolverines team has been very lackluster and very disappointing. And now I'm wondering, is this a 7-5 team? Is this an 8-4 team? I thought they would be 9-3 or 10-2. So I'm pretty disappointed in what I've seen.
My surprise works right off of that because it's a little big picture. And when I use the word parity, I don't mean anybody can beat anybody. But coming into the season, we thought we had a top four and then a line, right? That it was going to be Ohio State and Oregon, Penn State and Michigan, and then a huge drop off to the rest of the conference where there would be a bunch of teams stacked up. But that is not the case at all. As Tom mentioned, Michigan a little bit down. As we discussed earlier, USC a little bit up. We've got teams like Washington and UCLA that have seemed to sink to the bottom, while we've got teams like Michigan State that are maybe exceeding expectations. No, I thought that this was going to be, a top tier, a huge middle class, and then a couple teams down at the bottom. Well, man, it looks more fluid than ever as we go 1 through 18 all through this conference. The way that these pieces are moving up and down fascinate me. There is no one line that you can draw because, yes, Oregon's dropped back, Michigan's dropped back, and we still don't know about Ohio State, though I do feel confident they're still the number one team. So the parity that we have, they're fine. Yeah, they're one. The parity that we have across this conference, a big surprise compared to where I was at looking at the Big Ten coming into the season. Well, coming up on the other side, we always like to leave you with one player to watch for the Big Ten at the week ahead. We'll give you that name next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. We love to send you off with a player to watch. Danny, I know last week you had identified a Michigan running back, and this week you're going with a different Michigan running back. You're selling all your Donovan Edwards stock, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, I watched them both last week, and Donovan Edwards had a nice game. Yeah, I think he had 82 yards rushing, but he did not have 153 yards rushing. I think it's becoming pretty evident that Khalil Mullings is the featured back of this system, and maybe that's where Donovan Edwards thrives, because that's where he played really well behind Blake Corum, kind of gave him that relief, and he was a guy who, when he came in and had opportunities, made the most of them. But for whatever reason, in the same amount of carries, Khalil Mullings has more touchdowns, and he's averaging more yards per carry, almost double of what Donovan Edwards had. So I think this is going to be a game. Look, they're both going to get a lot of opportunities. The amount they're going to run the football, they're both going to have opportunities, but I do think Mullings is slowly starting to become the lead back for the Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah, it's a classic thunder and lightning combo in the Michigan backfield, but I agree with you. I think Mullings is the better back. I'm going to go to Maryland, where, they lose Big Ten career all-time passing leader Taulia Tagovailoa finally to graduation after a decade and a half. And they bring in Billy Edwards at quarterback, who we don't look at as a guy that you would expect to throw the ball around a lot, but who leads the Big Ten in pass or receiving through 3 weeks? That's Maryland receiver Ty Felton, who has 27 catches for 447 yards and 4 touchdowns through 3 games. He has caught at least 7 passes in every game. He's had at least 119 yards in every game, and he scored a touchdown in every game. And right now, his 149 yards per game not only leads the Big Ten, it's third in the country. And this week, they're getting Villanova. So I expect another pretty large stat line coming his way.
All right, I'm going to go to a game that could be huge for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, because they find themselves as a very short underdog at Virginia Tech. And of course, if we're talking about Rutgers, we are going to be talking about Kyle Monangai, because he is leading the Big Ten right now, averaging 186.5 yards per game. That is second nationally, second only to that machine, Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. And when you think about the biggest games of the season, that is when you want to die with your fastball. That is where you want to look Virginia Tech in the eye as the visitor and say, we don't think that you can stop our stud running back. I think that is a huge part of the game plan, and that's why Kyle Monangai is my player to watch in that big-time Rutgers-Virginia Tech non-conference game. Well, if you liked what you saw here, well then come on over and join us wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch the Cover 3 podcast at youtube.com/Cover3. We are live Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays at 11 a.m., Saturday nights at 11:30 p.m., and of course, you can download the Cover 3 podcast wherever you get your podcast. Just scan that QR code on the screen.